Hi there and welcome to the show. My name's Alex Cooper. Today I'm really excited to have actually a good friend of mine with me, and I'm going to be asking him a few questions and having a conversation about a really central element to our faith. And yeah, Fr Lawrence Lew, no better man to have a conversation about wonderful things like the Rosary, the Dominican anniversary, but you've got a lot of hats. Just give us a little bit of an overview of what you do.
Well, thank you very much. Firstly, it's great to be here. Great to be back in the studio in Walsingham, really, and in this beautiful village. I love being here, not just because my friends are here, but because I think Our Lady is very much present here. Our Lady is so important to the Dominican Order, as you mentioned, because of the Rosary. And to that end, I am the Rector of the Rosary Shrine in London. That's in North London. It's located, well, I would say between Hampstead and Camden. It's called Haverstock Hill officially, but people forget where Haverstock Hill is because the train station that used to be there isn't there anymore. Did you know that was why it's called Haverstock Hill?
I never knew.
Yeah, there was a train station right there. That's why there's a little row of shops next to the school, St. Dominic's School, and then you've got a little row of shops, and then the station was there. But unfortunately, the station is gone. But we are still one of the largest churches in London, reputedly the 5th largest church in London, which is quite something, I think.
Very good.
Built in 1883 and established in a very unique way in its architecture, with shrines, little chapels, I should say, to every single mystery of the Holy Rosary. So that's 14 chapels on either side of the central nave. Yeah. And then in the apse, this beautiful image of Our Lady crowned as Queen of Heaven with all the saints looking on. And on top of that, then there's also chapels to Our Lady of the Rosary herself, a chapel of St. Dominic, where there's a beautiful painting of his death, which is very significant this year. Yeah. Also a statue of and an altar to St. Joseph, again very significant this year.
Of course.
And finally an altar on the other side to St. Thomas Aquinas, who is one of our great saints, really, because he's one of the greatest teachers in the church. So this church, the Rosary Shrine, was made an official shrine of the Archdiocese of Westminster by the Cardinal in 2016. So, you know, it's celebrating its own little 5th anniversary. But in fact, as we'll go on and talk about, this is a significant year of anniversaries for us, for the Dominican Order, and indeed, I think, for the Church.
But you've got a couple more anniversaries around this time as well. The anniversary of the arrival of the Dominicans in the UK. You spoke about, obviously, Dies Natalis of St. Dominic, but also the Battle of Lepanto. So everything wraps up around the Rosary for you at this time, really.
That's right, yeah. The Rosary is, you know, very much part of the spirituality of the Dominican Order. Yep. It's the special gift of Our Lady to St. Dominic, our founder, and it is through St. Dominic and the Dominican Order that the Rosary was given then to the whole Church. The preaching of the Rosary, the teaching of the Rosary, and the using of the Rosary has, for all these hundreds of years, been entrusted to the Dominican Order since the beginning of the Rosary itself, what we call the Rosary anyway. Yep. I mean, praying with beads and counting your prayers with beads goes back a long way, right to the Desert Fathers. Yep. In the 4th century or so, but certainly St. Dominic in the 13th century, the tradition would say, changed the way in the way that the Rosary is prayed, in the sense that we now pray these prayers. We don't just count the number of Hail Marys, but we also meditate, can concentrate on a particular mystery of the Rosary, a particular mystery of our salvation. And it's divided, as we know very well, joyful, sorrowful, glorious. Yeah. Right? It's like a little triptych in which we see the mysteries of salvation unfolding. In the joyful, it's God becoming human, and in the sorrowful is the passion of Christ, by which he redeems all that is human and has fallen into sin. Right? He redeems us by the cross, by the shedding of his blood, by his sufferings. And in the glorious, we see then the effect of his redemption, which is the raising of humanity from sin and united to him and to his divinity, that we might be carried to heaven with him. And of course, Our Lady is the first to receive the grace of fullness of salvation. Our Lady, of course, is saved and sanctified at the moment of her conception. but we see this wonderful movement of God becoming man, and that's all expressed in the joyful, sorrowful, and glorious mysteries of the Rosary. I actually, go into this at some depth, I suppose, in this new book that I've just written. It's about to be published.
Taking the words right out of my mouth.
In October by the CTS.
Expand a little bit on that.
So, I try and explain really the triptych, as I call it, of the Rosary, but also I talk about how the luminous mysteries fit into that picture. Because luminous mysteries, of course, were added by Pope St. John Paul II. It's not true to say that he added them. He didn't definitively say, you've got to say these, but he sort of introduced them to us and suggested that it might be fitting to meditate upon these particular mysteries in the life of Christ in his public ministry.
Yeah.
So in the book that I've written, which is called Mysteries Made Visible, I explain firstly the triptych, and I concentrate on the triptych of joyful, sorrowful, and glorious, but then I want to explain how I believe the luminous mysteries can be added or supplemented. It sort of draws from the Paschal mystery of Christ, from the central three mysteries. And in fact, I think the luminous mysteries are about the sacramental life of the Church. And therefore, they help us to meditate on how we, in our daily living in the Church, can appropriate the mysteries of Christ's life, death, and resurrection.
Maybe expand a little bit. You touched on kind of how we incorporate the Rosary into our life, and certainly I, for one, I remember being as a boy going, "Oh, I have to do the Rosary." It can appear a chore or just something a little bit alien to people. So, particularly in your book, you speak about that visualization of the Rosary, that contemplation in daily life.
Yes. Well, let me tell you a secret, right? I mean, it's not a secret anymore, but I have mentioned it before, but I do find the Rosary difficult at times. It can be kind of a chore in a way. I don't see it as a chore as such, but I certainly used to. Yeah. And I used to feel guilty if I didn't say the Rosary.
Okay.
So you had to be guilt-tripped into saying it, because all these great saints and the Pope all says we've got to pray the Rosary, and that's what I was told in my parish. You had to pray the Rosary. And being a convert, it just wasn't something that came naturally to me at all, right? It was really quite strange because nobody actually taught me. I didn't really understand what it was about. I didn't have, Catholic parents who told me we had to sit around the table and do it. I have many parishioners who told me how much they dreaded the family Rosary, because it was after dinner, everyone had to kneel down by the dinner table and sort of say the Rosary. Now, I think that's a real shame, but I think that we should not give up on the Rosary, but we should rediscover it. And we can use a lot of art and a lot of music. We have to engage the imagination in order to begin to appreciate and love the mysteries of our salvation, because that's what the Rosary is about. At the heart of the Rosary, at least of what we call the Dominican Rosary, is the meditation on these aspects of our salvation, on the mysteries of salvation. And so this book, as I mentioned, Mysteries Made Visible, is about how we can engage the imagination through the visual, through what we see. One of the things I love doing, and I've been doing here in Walsingham again, is just taking photographs of the beauty of creation, but also mainly, really, for me, it's the beauty of sacred art in our churches and in architecture and so on. And so I've been known as a photographer, I suppose. People often joke that, to see a picture of me without a camera around my neck is quite strange. And my provincial, I think, joked that at my ordination, he wouldn't be surprised if I had a sort of GoPro and a selfie stick. I didn't, as it happens.
I can vouch for that.
But yes, I'm often seen with a camera.
Yeah.
Because the camera is the instrument of contemplation for me. It's what I use to help me to see the beauty of God's creation, but also to show to others that beauty that I've contemplated. In this book, then, there are 20 images of sacred art from various churches around the world that show us those 20 mysteries of the Rosary, joyful, sorrowful, glorious, and then the luminous as well. And then I do what I call a kind of visio divina. We all know about lectio divina, which is a sort of imaginative rumination on the Word of God. in this case, I'm sort of ruminating, I'm thinking with, contemplating with the image, the sacred image, on the particular mystery. So there's a short text, no more than 300 words, that accompany each of the photographs, each of the images of one of the mysteries of the Rosary. And I sort of draw out from the sacred image that I'm looking at, I draw out the fullness of the mystery. If you like, I meditate on that particular mystery. For example, there's an image of the presentation in the temple, and it's a carved wooden image from the high altar in the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C., where I spent 2 years studying for my license in theology. So, you know, it's a piece of art that's well known to me. I saw it every single day, several times a day, sitting in the chapel. And what struck me as I meditated on it is the woodiness of it, because it's not painted wood. It was very, very brown, and you could see the grain in the faces and the images of, of Our Lady and so on. And it made me think that, you know, when our Lord was presented in the temple, that's also the feast or the time of his being held up as the light of the nations. And Simeon says, "For my eyes have seen our salvation," right? And Christ saves us by the wood of the cross. And so the woodiness of that image, if you like, the woodiness, made me kind of think of that.
Spoke to that particular
So
aspect.
I sort of bring that out.
Yeah.
So that's how I use the actual piece of art itself to help me to reflect theologically on the mystery that we're meditating on.
And kind of bringing it home to the UK. When we first met, we met in Newcastle, and I was studying, and you'd just been ordained a deacon. And we obviously got on very well, and it was there in Newcastle I first, well, thanks to you really, became aware of the Dominican presence in the UK, and that kind of the visualization of the Rosary, perhaps, maybe a little bit later down the line, of that in the UK. So take the black and white of Newcastle United, perhaps take Blackfriars Pub in London. Just expand a little bit on the Dominicans in the UK and perhaps reveal the mystery of the black and white, because right now all I see is perhaps a white friar. That's a common mistake.
Yes, exactly. I think I mentioned then to you that Newcastle United wears a black and white strip because black and white are the colours of the Dominican friars. Why? Because over this white habit we would wear a black cape. In church we would wear that from All Souls Day until Easter Sunday, or the Easter Vigil, I should say. And whenever we went out on the streets, traditionally when we went out on the streets, or when we were preaching or doing something formal like in a procession or at a funeral, we would wear our black capes. So it meant that whenever we were out on the streets and seen by the people of England, they would see us in these black and white habits, and so they called us Blackfriars. Of course, this leads to a lot of confusion because we don't always wear our kappas, our capes out on the street. So I still remember, when I was a novice walking around and someone said to us, "Oh, you must be," I think he said, "Cistercians." So I said, "Well, good guess, but we're actually Dominicans." And he says, where do you live?" And I said, "Well, we live at Blackfriars in Cambridge." He says, "But you're not Blackfriars, you should be Whitefriars." I said, "Well, no, the Whitefriars are Carmelites." And he said, "Well, don't they wear brown?" So I said, "Well, yes, but they have a white cape." And then, it gets a bit more confusing if you're familiar with Franciscans and you think that Franciscans should wear brown like the Capuchins do. And they said, "Well, why are they called Grey Friars?"
Yeah.
And that's because obviously their medieval color was a grey habit, which the CFRs famously have that now.
Yeah, of course.
And of course there are other branches of the Franciscan family that also wear grey now. People get very confused about these names, but we are called Blackfriars.
Yeah.
And many people are familiar with the name Blackfriars because it's a major underground station in London.
Yep.
And of course, there's a very famous pub that was saved by John Betjeman called Blackfriars Pub. Beautiful pub, really wonderful place. Big mistake though is that if you go in, you see Franciscans in their Capuchin habits with the sort of rope cincture frolicking all over the place. Not a single Blackfriar in sight, because somebody didn't do their research about what Blackfriars should look like. But this is the Dominican habit, a white habit with normally a black cape on top of it in formal occasions and so on.
So the Dominicans really have, a great influence on
yes,
not just religion, but the popular culture as a whole.
Yes, indeed. We have an 800-year history in England. 4 of my brothers have done a 2-week pilgrimage.
Yes,
so
wonderful pilgrimage.
Yeah, they walked from the coast, really, from Ramsgate, which is, of course, the beautiful shrine of St. Augustine of Canterbury.
Yeah.
And they walked via Canterbury. They had Vespers in the cathedral, and then they walked for 2 weeks to Oxford. Mm-hmm. They were walking in the spirit of those first 13 friars who arrived in England in 1221.
And was that more or less the original journey, or do we know much about
no,
that?
it wasn't really possible to know exactly the route that they took, but we know that they stopped in Canterbury, and we know that they stopped in London. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Because in Canterbury, the Archbishop, after hearing them preach, said to these friars preachers, because that's our formal title, we're the order of preachers. We were known as friars preachers, meaning the preaching brothers. And the Archbishop of Canterbury said, that's a wonderful sermon. We would like you to set up a house here. And they said, no, we're headed to Oxford. And they stopped in London, which of course is the royal capital. Mm-hmm. So they bypassed the ecclesiastical capital of Canterbury. They went to the political capital where the king was. And again, they preached, and again, they were invited to set up a house, a friary. And they said, no, we're going to move on to Oxford. And finally, they made it to Oxford. And they headed to Oxford, and they arrived on the 15th of August. That's the Feast of the Assumption. And that's always been a very special date for us, because it was on the Feast of the Assumption that St. Dominic first sent out the friars in pairs, telling them to preach the gospel to all nations, right? So that date is the date of the apostolic mission, the date of being sent out. And so there's this real sense that they were sent out, and indeed they were. These first 13 were sent by St. Dominic himself to come to this country and to establish a house in Oxford, which was then the great center of theology and learning. And that has been very much part of our charism right from the beginning, to be engaged in the questions of the day, and to be people who would preach the truth and engage in questions concerning truth, and to draw people back to the truth through the use of reason, which is always in harmony with the truths of faith. St. Thomas Aquinas is, of course, that great expositor of the unity of faith and reason, which Pope St. John Paul II wrote about in his encyclical Fides et Ratio.
This might seem a far-fetched question, but how does the Rosary fit into that quite concrete mission of preaching truth, engaging with politics, popular culture?
Well, in fact, prayer is the foundation for everything we do in life, really. And I've often said to people, you can take the 24 bus in London, which I like to nickname the Rosary Rider. Right? Because the 24 bus takes you from opposite Westminster Cathedral, and you go right up past Westminster Abbey, past Parliament, right up towards Trafalgar Square, past Downing Street, and up to past the hospitals, and then through Camden Town to St. Dominic's Priory in North London. Mm-hmm. It takes you about 45 minutes on a good day to take that bus ride. 24 bus from Westminster Cathedral. Now, as you do that, pray the Rosary. And so you'll be praying for, politicians in Parliament, praying for the Prime Minister. As you pass the National Gallery, you'll be praying for the arts. As you go past the hospital, you can pray for that, people who work there in the hospital, for the medical sciences, and for scientists, therefore, by extension. As you go through Camden Town, you see a very colorful panoply of people, and you can pray for them. And then finally you arrive at Our Lady's Shrine at the Rosary Shrine in London. Now, the Rosary, therefore, is something that I think we can and should do as we take it to the streets. The friars first prayed the Rosary as they walked the length and breadth of Europe. And indeed, my 4 brothers who went on this pilgrimage, they prayed the Rosary, every single day. 20 decades they would pray. And they were praying for the various intentions entrusted to them, praying for the people they met, praying for the places they went through, praying for all the friars who had prayed and worshipped in these various historic places that they also visited.
And they're doing this out loud, then
Yeah,
this is not a secretive prayer, is it?
Well, we're dressed like this,
Yeah.
and the rosary is hanging right here.
Yeah.
It's a very visible thing. And I think it's important to pray the rosary openly. Many people comment on the beauty of the rosary beads. It's an opening. Children love these beads, and they often, I've been on in the airport, for example, and a child would come and reach out to the beads and start wanting to ask about them.
Yeah.
And so it's an opening. But the most important thing, I think, is to pray the rosary, not just kneeling by your dinner table at home, but really pray it as part of your life. So as you wait at the bus stop, pray the rosary. If you're sitting on the tube, pray the rosary. As you're traveling, as you're waiting for something in a queue, as you're walking around the supermarket, pray the rosary. That's the beauty of the rosary. It's something that you can carry with you.
Yeah.
It's a mobile praying device. And we don't have to pray all 5 decades in one sitting. I think that taking it a decade at a time means that you can then surround your whole day with prayer. As Scripture tells us, pray at all times. It's a wonderful way to do that. What I want people to develop really is the instinct of reaching for the rosary when they have a spare moment. We've all developed this terrible instinct of reaching for our mobile phones and fiddling around on the screens and I'll just see what's happening on Instagram or whatever, right? And that's become a habit and not necessarily a good one. If we can change that habit and make it about reaching for the rosary, I think that would be a very good thing to do. Now, as it happens, one of my other hats is to be Promoter General of the Holy Rosary. That's a job that I do for the entire Dominican Order, to preach and to promote the Rosary throughout the world. Firstly, within the order itself, but also, with people that I meet who are not necessarily Dominicans. But I want to invite them to be united with a Dominican way of praying when they pray the Rosary. One way I do that is to encourage those who pray the Rosary every week to join the Rosary Confraternity, which you can look up online, rosaryshrine.co.uk. And another thing I do is to just talk about the Rosary. And if you come to the Rosary Shrine, to show how the Rosary can be prayed, which is not by sitting statically in one place, but by moving in procession, sometimes with candles, which we do every Saturday. In the month of May, that's Our Lady's month.
Fantastic.
And in the month of October, the month of the Holy Rosary, every Saturday at 7 p.m. we have rosary processions, often with the statue of Our Lady, and we go in procession throughout the church.
I've seen it, the pictures many times on Facebook. Sadly, never made it myself. But yeah, it really brings, it seems to bring alive a prayer that otherwise we neglect.
There's something about movement.
Everything we like.
I think, the Rosary is a whole body thing. So it involves the whole person. That's why your mind is engaged meditating, and sometimes looking at sacred images, as I said, looking at the various altars which have these beautiful sculpted tableaus that show each of the mysteries of the Rosary. EWTN made a beautiful documentary about the Rosary Shrine in London, where you can see these beautiful altars. Now, having that art before us can help to focus the mind so that we remain focused and fixed on meditating on the mysteries. And at the same time, you've then got vocal prayers. You're saying the Hail Mary. And then you've got the movement of the fingers along the beads. It's very tactile. And you've got that other sense of movement now if you have a procession where you're sort of moving around the church. And often we have incense as well, so that engages all the senses, and the candlelight and everything. So the whole body is involved in praying the Rosary. Now, currently, as I say, we only do these processions 7 o'clock on Saturday in May and in October. But I very much hope, and I intend in the coming year, that we will do these once a month. On the first Saturday of the month at 7 o'clock, that's after the 6 p.m. Vigil Mass, we hope to have these Rosary processions because Pope Leo XIII asked the Dominicans to promote these Rosary processions as the work of the Rosary Confraternity. And the Rosary Confraternity, many people have forgotten what that's all about. But there used to be this great spiritual communion of people around the world who are united in the praying of the Rosary. Yep. And my great ambition, working with many friends throughout the world, both lay friends and my brothers in the order, is to reinvigorate the Rosary Confraternity starting in this year.
Fantastic.
Because this year is the 450th anniversary, another anniversary, of the Battle of Lepanto, and therefore the institution of the Feast of the Holy Rosary. For the viewers who may not remember this, Lepanto was a great battle fought off the coast of Greece against the Turkish forces who were going to overrun Europe at that point and therefore threaten all of Christianity in Europe. Mm-hmm. The Dominican Pope at the time, Saint Pius V, asked the Rosary confraternities throughout the world to pray the Holy Rosary, particularly the confraternity in Rome, which organized a procession. And it is believed, we believe that through the praying of the Rosary, victory was won against great odds. And Fantastic. So Pius V proclaimed it at first the Feast of Our Lady of the Victories, and then very quickly that became the Feast of the Holy Rosary.
Brilliant.
So we still celebrate that in the order, and I'm sure you've been there before. When you come on the first Sunday of October to St. Dominic's or any Dominican church in this country, we do this, for some people rather quaint thing of blessing roses at the end of Mass, and then we hand out these blessed roses. Yep. Well, the blessed rose is a beautiful sacramental that brings healing, and very important at this time when people are still feeling the effects of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And we'll be blessing roses as usual. And that's part of the sacramentals connected to the Dominican Order and the Rosary Confraternity.
Father Lawrence, unfortunately we've come to the end of our time today. We could go on for a lot more. We've covered so much, the history of the Dominicans in the UK. We've covered, why the Rosary can come alive and how it can come alive. And we've spoken about your book. And if anybody's interested, it's well worth putting your name down for it. And just as a little finishing thought, out of all the Dominican places in the UK, which one is your favourite?
My favourite has grown to be the Rosary Shrine in London, of course. But I think historically, Norwich has always been very special to me because it has one of the only, I think, complete Dominican churches in the country from the Middle Ages. So if we're looking historically, it would be the Blackfriars in Norwich.
Fantastic. It's not far from here, so maybe after this I'll find the local Rosary bus and head to Norwich.
Yes, well worth doing.
Father Lawrence, thank you very much. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you'd like to find out anything about this show, head over to ewtn.co.uk. EWTN is completely self-funding in the UK, and we'd be delighted if you could support us in our work. Until next time, God bless and goodbye.